Assalamu alaikum everybody, and a very warm welcome to this session on behalf of VLA. So this is the third session in our series of gender equity law webinars, and for today we'll be looking at human trafficking, crime and prevention. Now, as I've been saying to you previously as well, it's a coincidence that I actually had this session planned for today because July 30th happens to be an anti-human trafficking world day. So it gives us an opportunity to sort of relive, at least in our minds, what the unfortunate victims of trafficking or human smuggling have gone through over the years. It gives us an opportunity to actually learn the intricate details of this crime, because what we've seen on the media is quite different from what the crime actually is. We look at some of the pertinent laws and regulations as well, and some of the things that we can do as individuals, or some of the things that our organizations can perhaps do. So these are the objectives of today's webinars. We'll be looking at the core elements of human trafficking, the difference in terminology as well, because remember that when we talk about human trafficking, sometimes people synonymously use that term with things like human smuggling and modern slavery, and they all are slightly different. So we look at the subtle differences between the terms. We'll also look at the entire trafficking process of recruitment, transportation, etc. We'll look at the types of methods that are used by human traffickers. How do they groom their victims? For example, what happens in scenarios of sexual exploitation? What happens in scenarios of labor exploitation? What are the red flags? How can you help individuals? What are some of the statistics? So on and so forth. And obviously, we will focus on our own federal laws governing trafficking and migrant smuggling. Okay, again, I've already mentioned that it happens to be World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. So as I've been saying previously, kindly please do share your learning and whatever you want to share from this webinar on the relevant social media sites. Okay, so here's an icebreaker activity. I'm going to show you a couple of photos, and I'm going to ask you, what exactly do you think is happening in these pictures? Very straightforward. So what do you think is happening in this picture?
Sana, Margaret here. It seems to be some, are they shamed? Are they hiding? Are they face? Yeah.
It's a bust and they're hiding their face. They don't want to be on camera. Looks like a bust. I don't know, the pictures of massage parlors are like this when they come out as a bust of massage parlors or underground activities.
Absolutely.
This picture can also be this can also be called a moment of when there were these girls who were actually needy. They were needing money, and out of their need of money, they were ready to get into this act of like sexual exploitation. So this can also be leading to that as well.
Absolutely. So thank you, Margaret, Sadia, and Majid, for your comments. So absolutely, it is a sort of a bust, and it could be a massage parlor. In fact, it could be a brothel, just to put it bluntly. And it is a photo of victims of sexual exploitation or forced prostitution. As unfortunate as it is, obviously they're not able to show their faces. Given the body language or judging by the physical appearance, it seems like they're pretty young, which is what unfortunately, most victims of human trafficking, come within a sort of age bracket, although it doesn't necessarily have to be an age bracket, but that's how it is. Okay, what seems to be happening in this picture?
This is child labor, as I see it. Yeah.
Okay, this is an example of forced labor or child labor, as you rightly said, Margaret, and it's basically labor exploitation in an African country. And there's this whole thing to do with cocoa beans and how these children work on these plantations. And when you look at things like supply chains of different organizations, even these huge brands like Nestle, Cadbury, etc. There are now laws in Western countries, at least, that govern the supply chain activities in order to see whether human trafficking has been taking place or any kind of labor exploitation has been taking place, and then they do their best to minimize or to address those areas. Okay, what's happening here?
Forced marriage.
Exactly. So this may or may not be something that's known to you, but forced marriage is also an aspect of human trafficking. This image over here is a little difficult because people normally are not aware of this concept of what's called debt bondage. It's when you take a loan from somebody and they, happily give you a loan on the basis of taking a favor from you, but that favor doesn't happen to be anything that's legal or that's humane. They'll make you work and they will exploit you. It could be labor exploitation or it could even be sexual exploitation. So that's debt bondage. And this last image over here shows domestic servitude or forced domestic servitude, which is something that we've been hearing, something that has been taking place in Middle Eastern countries, at least over a long period of time. You hear of these women from different countries, poor countries like the Philippines or Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, or even Pakistan, going to the Middle East, and the employers then confiscating their passports, etc., and then forcing them to work ungodly hours, etc. So again, we're going to look at all of these things in more depth, but this was just to set the scene. Okay, so I've already told you that there are subtle differences between the various terms. And, we'll begin with modern slavery. So I don't know if anyone has actually heard of this term or not, but modern slavery is sort of an umbrella term. And what it means in very simple English is, when an individual is exploited by others for personal and or commercial gain. And this sort of, it's like an orange and it has different segments. So these are the different segments. Human trafficking is a massive component of modern slavery, which is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, coercion, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. So there are a number of different factors or a number of different segments to human trafficking as well. And obviously, we've already looked at some of the aspects of human trafficking. We'll look at those in more detail. And then we come to something that we have been hearing of quite frequently in the news, at least in Pakistan. And that is something that's called either migrant smuggling or human smuggling. Now, human trafficking and migrant smuggling are terms that are used interchangeably, but there is a difference. When you talk about migrant smuggling, you're talking about a service. It's typically transportation and or providing fraudulent documents to an individual who voluntarily seeks to gain illegal entry into a foreign country. So remember, and as we move on with this webinar, we'll look at the migrant boat crisis that happened very recently off the coast of Greece and how, hundreds of Pakistanis perished, and what exactly were the processes involved over there. We'll also begin with a few statistics. So, 50 million victims of human trafficking exist. 21 million people are victims of forced labor, and this image in the middle shows you the different, continents and how many people of forced labor exist on these different continents. I'm just going to move these boxes around now and then. Forced labor generates annual profits of $150 billion US. So it just goes to show how people are exploited, despite all the laws, despite all the United Nations regulations, but and despite all the measures that are being enforced. But despite that, this crime seems to be profiting and progressing. Again, some more statistics. Human trafficking is the second largest international crime industry. There are an estimated 24.9 million victims worldwide, etc. Going to again try and move this box. Okay. 71% of trafficking victims are girls and men, while 29% are boys and men. So you have to understand that when we talk about human trafficking, we're not only focusing on sexual exploitation of women and children. We are looking at practically everybody and anybody, which is, the categories that I showed you at the very start. So men and boys are also part of that. It could be somebody older as well or someone younger. Anybody could be a victim of human trafficking. So what is human trafficking? Again, I've already shared some of the pertinent details, but I'll just go through the definition in more detail. It's the acquisition of people by improper means, and the improper means includes, and this is a very important component of luring people, it's force, fraud, and deception with the aim of exploiting them. It can be across international borders, so something that's known as transnational, or within one country. It can include being moved within and between cities, towns, and rural locations. And a victim can be exploited during the journey and or at the final destination. So we have a money laundering, or rather anti-money laundering expert with us today. We've got Majid Akhtar. And Majid will obviously, I think Majid, you can also, verify this, that when we talk about money laundering and we talk about things like drug trafficking, human trafficking, we're not talking about one particular jurisdiction. We're talking about a source, transit, and destination, jurisdictions, which is how all of these activities take place, and which is what makes it even more complicated to tackle and to address. So sorry, Majid, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, because this is like one of the base crime which is used in money laundering. So money laundering is not only to do with single crime only. It has got list of crimes. So once those base crimes are proved, then the person is actually becomes convicted of the crime of money laundering. So yes, human trafficking is one very core reason why the money laundering takes place. So yes, I agree to you.
Thanks for sharing that detail, Majid. I'd also like to add at this juncture that Pakistan, very unfortunately, has been a source, transit, and destination country for human trafficking over the years, and it still is to date. Okay, this map over here actually shows you the actual process of human trafficking. Now, it has nothing to do with Pakistan. I found it online, so it focuses on Cambodia and how Cambodian women are actually transported for sexual exploitation. But it'll give you a clear image of how this process actually takes place. So normally people from vulnerable communities are targeted, as you can see the cursor on screen. And in this case, women from Cambodia who come from a low socioeconomic background, they are then deceived and promised jobs in other countries, namely China in this case, and then they're recruited. The transportation can either be, by different means. It could be by air, it could be by land, it could be by sea. Once they are transported to a different jurisdiction, they are then coerced and sexually exploited. They're threatened with deportation. As I mentioned at the very start, their passports and other documents are confiscated. They're threatened to be forced into the sex work, which they often are. They're physically and sexually abused. There were also some cases of these Pakistani brides that were being that were trafficked to China a couple of years ago. So they could even be married off to the human trafficker. So just remember that. And their movements are restricted. They have no access to communicate with others, whether they are neighbors, or whether they are law enforcement. They are even forced to marry several men, or as you can well imagine, what else are they forced to do? If anybody is able to escape, or if somebody else is able to intervene, say, for example, a neighbor, or if they go to a local supermarket and someone's able to detect the signs, and we will have a look at those signs as well, then obviously law enforcement, NGOs, and other sort of authorities can intervene, and that's where you get the assistance, rescue, and then the reintegration process is, of course, something that happens. for victims of human trafficking, or what's better known as survivors of human trafficking. And there are many stories. I will share some of the links on our WhatsApp group, so you can go away and have a look in your own time. Okay, just moving on a little from there, when we look at the United Nations framework on human trafficking, the first thing that comes to mind is the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, which happens to be the main body that governs the rules and regulations to do with human trafficking. It was actually delegated to do so by this particular convention that was formed in 2000. The convention has 3 different protocols, which focuses on these 3 different aspects. So it focuses on suppression and punishing trafficking of humans, preventing smuggling of migrants by land, air, and sea, and also to prevent the illicit manufacturing of and trafficking in firearms, etc. And then there's also the United Nations Police Division, which aims to assist the national jurisdictions as well with human trafficking. And then obviously we've got Interpol as well, who plays an important role. So as we've already seen previously, there isn't one form of human trafficking. There are quite a few different forms, which include sexual exploitation, forced marriage, selling children, something that I didn't really want to talk about because it is quite gruesome, but it is an unfortunate fact, which is organ harvesting or removal of organs, and it's normally to do with kidneys and things. It happens a lot in South American countries, especially in Brazil. I don't know if it still happens, but at least it did, including countries like Mexico. So that is another area of human trafficking. And then you have child soldiers, which, if you are aware of any of the war conflicts, especially in countries, in African countries, or if you may have seen any movies depicting those wars, they groom these children and they sort of train them to become soldiers at a very young age. So they'll hand over a rifle to an 8-year-old boy, and they'll ask them to start firing whoever they see. So these are, again, different forms of trafficking. Forced begging as well is something that's part of it. And in a country like Pakistan, where we see a lot of these beggar mafias, and we see these small children who are, sometimes as young as probably 5 years old or something, it makes you wonder, what exactly is happening. Okay, I was unable to show you this video, but I did share it on the WhatsApp group earlier. Did anybody actually see this video when I shared it on the group? Okay, I'm assuming that no one did. Could you, next time when I do share the videos, please do have a look, because most of the case studies actually focus on those. So this video was actually about 2 sisters who were lured by a beauty parlor in Dubai, and they were called there with promises of better prospects of job and good salary packages. But when they actually went there, they found themselves in a brothel. They were forced into prostitution, and then with great difficulty they were able to actually come back to Pakistan. And then the video also shows you the procedure of filing an FIR, and then what happens. And it's not easy to catch the human traffickers. That is something that that needs to be advocated for more, because even in the migrant boat tragedy, we've seen that the arrest of the human traffickers has taken place on a piecemeal basis, and I think that more should be done over here. Anyway, we'll move on. Okay, let's focus on sexual exploitation for a moment. And before we look at that, does anyone know what the grooming procedures are of sexual exploitation, or have you seen any movies? I think that might be better to talk about that, where you can discuss how women are forced into prostitution.
So I read on this case of British Pakistanis. There was a gang of British Pakistanis men who were basically grooming white Christian girls to become And so how it would start would be like they just tag a girl, then start hanging out with them, giving them gifts, and then giving them drugs, basically getting them hooked on drugs, then showing them different videos, and then using them as I would say, I don't know how to explain that, but it would be basically in their justification was because these are white girls, so there's no crime in sexually exploiting these girls. And then they would actually ask them to bring another girl. And then we've also seen the Harvey Weinstein case as well, in which he would also ask girls that pay you this amount of money if you bring a friend. And then all these schoolgirls would just start getting hooked on the money that they would get out of small favors, starting small, and then grooming them into different uh, gangs of child sex workers, I guess. So I think there are plenty of examples out there. We've all read through these horrific stories.
Thank you, Sadia, for all of that. Indeed, I mean, there have been many cases, and especially this particular gang in England. I think they were in the north of England who were running a fish and chip shop, or I don't know, there was something along those lines. But yes, they were an Asian gang, and they had exploited a lot of young underaged white girls, and they were running this human trafficking gang. The Harvey Weinstein case, you're absolutely right, has some connotations, but that is more to do with sexual harassment. But well, yes, when I think some of it does fall into this territory. There's another case of Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know if you've heard of, if any of you have actually heard of this man. He's no longer alive. He died, killed himself, I think, when he was in prison. And he had a female companion. In fact, he had a girlfriend whose name presently escapes my mind, but she's been in the news. She was prosecuted in America. She's originally British. And she came from a very wealthy background, in fact, and she used to actually assist him in grooming these girls. I mean, they had a sort of massage parlor in Jeffrey Epstein's house. And they used to lure these girls, as Sadia rightly said, with different promises. When one girl came, they used to ask her to bring in somebody else, and she assisted with the grooming, and that's how the human trafficking started. So these are the different processes. Basically, you firstly befriend somebody, give them some sort of promises, false hopes. Intoxication, of course, is for countries such as, in Western countries where you're meeting somebody for a drink. Sometimes you lace that drink as well. You gradually then alienate them. If you hear some of the survivor stories, they'll tell you how, as part of the grooming process, these men actually succeed in telling these women not to communicate with others. They tell them, they'll help them out. And of course, they target these vulnerable women who are either poor or who are pregnant, or there's something that's lacking in their lives. They then tend to isolate them. And obviously, once they're in that position, when they keep them in, places like brothels, they tend to desensitize the situation, and then obviously they capitalize on the vulnerabilities of these women by abusing them. So I'm just going to put all of these, that we've spoken about. These are the different types of methods that are used by traffickers. Now, I'd also like to say one thing, that when we live in Pakistan, because we're all living, alhamdulillah, comfortably in our own homes, you don't have that access to the outside world as you do when you're living in a Western country. So things are slightly different here. But if you're living in a Western country, and I was in the UK for a very long period of time, you really don't even know what's happening, in the next door apartment. And many a times, these sort of activities, such as human trafficking, sexual exploitation, or whatever, is actually happening in your next door apartment. I mean, there have been places in England, very popular places, such as Oxford Circus, Harley Street, which you may have heard of, which is where people either go for medical, the top-notch doctors at Harley Street or Oxford Circus for your shopping. And it is at such locations as well that raids have been carried out, and the police and other agencies have actually stumbled upon human trafficking gangs, and these victims of human trafficking. So, these are things that one really needs to be aware of, especially if you're living in Western countries, because you might see a girl, it could be a next door neighbor, and she could be a victim of human trafficking. Um, and there are some red flags to spot. So we're looking at things like physical abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, excessive working hours, which is again what victims of sexual and labor exploitation are subjected to, false promises or deception, restricting access to finances so that the victim cannot run off, keeping them on psychoactive substances such as drugs and alcohol so that they are numb for most of the time and they don't even know what's happened. If you actually go and look at some of these survivor stories of sexual exploitation, the women will tell you that they were raped repeatedly, but obviously they wouldn't remember how many people actually raped them because of the effects of psychoactive substances that they were compelled to take. Okay, and then just some other points over here, like withholding basic necessities, not letting these women approach hospitals or clinics if they're in need, withholding the documents, as I've already discussed, withholding wages, which happens a lot in cases of domestic servitude, forced domestic servitude, or labor exploitation. These were things, very unfortunately, that happened in some of the top Gulf, Middle Eastern countries. And I'm going to, say that it's something that those countries have actually worked towards now, especially if you look at some of these very hi-fi countries. And we used to hear stories of, these people being exploited in Qatar, for example. They went to do some construction work, and they were working excessive hours. Their documents were confiscated. And then in countries like UAE as well, there have been a number of cases of, these massage parlors, which actually, or other beauty parlors, which actually turned out to be brothels. And again, domestic servitude as well, where their passports were confiscated. But having said that, with the modernization and the progress that's taking place in these countries, there are now laws that are in place which deal with these things very seriously. I've already discussed debt bondage, and then threat of action by law enforcement or immigration. So the human trafficker will tell the victim that if you go beyond this boundary, or if you go and complain about me, the immigration will catch you. You will be deported. You will be sent to prison. It's not going to be me who's going to be in trouble. It's going to be you. So again, we have to bear in mind that these are all lies, and this is all actually part of that deceit that they instill their victims with. Threats of violence made against family and friends. If you complain about me, if you reveal my identity, I will destroy your family, things like that. So, and yeah, limiting or restricting access to medical services. So these are some of the different ways that human traffickers control their victims. So before we move on, are there any questions or any comments?
So I was just saying, I mean, we have been using the example of West or UAE, but unfortunately, the similar things are taking place in our very country as well. I mean, in this very city of Karachi and in Lahore, in Islamabad. So it's just that these things are being supervised or organized by people who are very powerful. So because of those reasons, these things do not reach to media, mass media. I mean, even before even if somebody's caught, so the people who are actually organizing these crimes are so powerful that they would not let these news to reach the mass media. So, I mean, even if some leakage take place, even if, somehow, uh, even, I mean, if one news reaches to some of the media corner, then immediately instructions are sent to the higher authorities to not spread the news, or don't let this crime to come up on the on the broadcast media. So I mean, unfortunately, these things are taking place in Pakistan as well. It's just that people whoever tries to raise voice against these. I mean, there were like a couple of journalists who tried raising voice against these couple of years ago, but even those journalists were sent behind bars. So that's unfortunate in our country as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Majid. And I think that there is this very recent case as well of uh, this girl who was abused by, I think, a judge's wife. I think she was a maid servant, and she has sustained so many injuries to her. And this is not the first time that this has happened. A couple of years ago, there was that very famous Tayyaba case as well.
Yeah.
And the man who tortured her and his wife, well, he was also a judge based in Rawalpindi. So, for now, we are hearing of this on the media, but after some time, we won't know what the outcome was. And you're absolutely right that this is the same with cases of trafficking. Um, and there are some links. I'll have to say at this juncture that the FIA, have been doing uh, a pretty decent job. But obviously, a lot more needs to be done. And as Majid says, that in Pakistan, the problem is that many cases, and we discussed this previously as well, are not reported either out of shame or stigma, or because of fear that something might happen to the victims or their families, or even if they are reported, then because of the slow processes that we have, or because of the inefficiency of the law enforcement agencies, nothing is really done in time to prevent these tragedies from taking place. So we'll just move on now. Okay, again, we've been discussing these red flags, but just to highlight some of the main features, that when you see somebody, what makes you think that this person might be a victim? Now, obviously, what I've got on the screen over here could suggest that this person is a victim of domestic violence as well, but there's something amiss somewhere. Does the person have any signs of physical abuse? And when we talk about physical abuse, obviously, we're talking about bruises, cigarette burns, etc. Is there any evidence that the person has been forced or intimidated or coerced into providing sexual services? Is there anything that she says that suggests this? And we have people over here working from foreign countries, working as maids, and these are sort of things to actually look out for. Are there any signs the person is experiencing any emotional trauma? Are they withdrawn? Are they sitting in a corner, for example? Even if it's a servant or whoever it is, I mean, especially servants, I think that it is our moral obligation for us to actually ask them if everything's okay, and if there's anything we can do to help. And then when we talk about labor exploitation, again, we're talking about similar things. Do workers show any signs of psychological, physical abuse? Do they appear frightened, withdrawn, or confused? Are they forced to stay in accommodations provided by the employer? Again, we've seen so many examples of that all around the world, where there's one particular accommodation, and the video at the very start where that boy is promised a contract by that agent, the football example, shows how he's actually forced to stay in that horrible accommodation. And these accommodations often are in a very horrible condition. So is the employer or somebody other than the worker holding the employee's passport and legal documents? Again, important things to watch out for. Okay, when it comes to, okay, I'm going to ask you all a question. How many of you, I'm assuming most of you are married, but how many of you have or may have used online websites, just to communicate with people or getting to know people in a romantic capacity? How many of you have actually explored these different apps or websites? Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. So
Question,
how
sorry.
many people with us today as part of this webinar, how many of you have actually accessed these apps or websites where you've communicated with people either for friendships, or either for romantic relationships? I understand that most of you are married and you may have done this in your earlier years, but have you actually accessed any of these websites and or chat rooms or any of these apps ever in your life?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, in this country, even saying yes on this topic, it becomes a problem. But people normally in every part of the world, they do when in their grooming ages. So when we are like, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, in our grooming ages, we in fact all have experienced these things. So we all have been visiting these websites. We all have been interacting with the people on these websites, and we
Okay.
all have been getting cheated on these websites as well. So yeah,
Okay. So
that's my.
I'd like to add here, Sana, I haven't at all. So by saying all of us, that would be,
Yeah, sorry,
stereotyping, but I
all of us,
haven't.
most of us.
But
Yeah,
gee,
sorry.
but I'm aware that I'm aware that many people do. Yeah. Again, not stereotyping, some of them. Yeah.
Sadia, did you want to say something? Because I saw your, yeah.
What I wanted to add here was that, so basically there's so many different uh, types of platforms available for meeting people, and it's not specifically just these websites or apps designed for the specific purpose of communicating with random people, but online gaming portals, chat rooms are on Twitter chat rooms, Facebook chats, anywhere you go, even at this stage, your Daraz app leads to WhatsApp chats, and your Baikia or whatever Kareem apps lead to chats, and so the avenues are multiple. And your point about false promises, I see the entire social media is just a game of trying to figure out where the authenticity of where and how you're talking to and to whom you're talking to. That's just what I wanted to add here.
It's great, very enlightening. Thank you guys for for your comments and contributions. So you're Sadia, you're absolutely right. When we're not specifically talking about any kind of shadi.com type of apps, but you're right that even in gaming apps or other sorts of apps, we are communicating with people. Even on LinkedIn, in fact, and I have known so many people who are very well connected with me now through LinkedIn. But the point is that uh, with this evolution in technology, and with our main mode of communication or interaction being the online platforms for friendships or for professional relationships, for seeking a job, particularly, what do you do? I mean, if I'm sitting here and I'm trying to find a job in the UK, I would go to one of those recruitment websites. I would apply online, right? And obviously in many romantic relationships, I mean, you have apps like Tinder and or so many other apps as well. Now the point over here is that, and I'm not going to go into the depths of cyber crimes, because that in itself is a huge topic which we can keep for some other time, but suffice it to say that when we talk about human trafficking, and especially in the case of sexual exploitation and in forced labor, all of these different platforms online, apart from playing a positive role, can also play a negative role. And now let me tell you, why do they play a negative role? If you're naive and you don't know who's at the other end, and you haven't actually checked the authenticity of that organization or the person who you're talking with, there can be a big problem. I would actually say that if you're communicating with somebody for whatever reason, try and do your own due diligence. Go to LinkedIn, have a look at the organization, have a look at that individual, see where have they worked. So say, for example, you're communicating with somebody, and I'm not just saying this for people over here, but this is the sort of message that you'll be conveying after this webinar to other people. If you have somebody who is considering somebody for marriage, and they've met through shadi.com, for example, and you've checked their LinkedIn profile, and it says that they worked at Standard Chartered Bank between such and such year, try and find somebody at Standard Chartered Bank just to make sure that what they've written is actually correct. I know that this sounds a little too much, but these are things that people really need to be doing. And one of the reasons why people are victims of things like human smuggling, migrant smuggling, and whatever we saw with this entire boat tragedy was that people trusted these human smugglers or these human traffickers, thinking that whatever promises they're making to us, and those promises went beyond all of these. It was almost like, you'll reach Greece or Italy and you will be able to claim asylum, you'll get the passport of those countries, hame $7,000 $8,000 de do. Okay, and people actually, and again, we're going to look at that whole area in a couple of moments, but believing those people, these people took loans from others, and they were very poor people. They invested thinking कि आज हम $7 या $8,000 invest करेंगे तो कल हमारी जिंदगी बन जाएगी. Little did they know कि जिंदगी बिल्कुल ही चली जाएगी. So these are the sort of things to make sure. And again, the big problem in Pakistan is that there is a huge problem of awareness. I mean, whilst we're conducting these sort of webinars and things, we can talk about these different aspects, these processes, and make ourselves aware. And we can then pass this message on to others from our learning. But in Pakistan, people don't really know what these crimes are. A vast majority of people have never even heard of this term of human trafficking, for example. Other things are more well known, like domestic violence, etc. But human trafficking is one area that people are not aware of. If you do know anything about human trafficking, it's from movies like Taken, which I don't know if you've seen, with Liam Neeson, and other sorts of movies, which don't necessarily depict the accurate version of human trafficking. So again, this is our opportunity to spread the word. So again, when we talk about false promises relating to jobs, investigate whether the organization is real or not, investigate the background of the employers. And when we talk about fictitious declarations of love, avoid befriending strangers on the internet. You go ahead and befriend strangers on the internet, but please do not give in all of your personal details. Never divulge your, and obviously, Majid, again, being an expert with bank fraud, can testify to this. Never give your bank account details, especially when it comes to these scams. You receive these messages saying that we are from the state bank and aapka number block ho jayega if you don't respond to this message. Please just avoid these ridiculous things. And do not accept invitations to meet strangers without informing people, such as your parents. And I think this is mostly for children, um, uh, obviously, and for their guardians as well. So
Just wanted to share one term as well, because
yeah.
in this world of financial fraud, there's another term which is being used currently, which is known as social engineering. So what do we do in social engineering is that anybody will interact with somebody, so they will portray them as someone who is trying to only become their friend. So they'll start asking a personal question gradually. So we will assume, or we will think that somebody is trying to become our friend, but unknowingly, by over trusting somebody, we shall be sharing some information which can be exploited against us. So we should be very careful when sharing our personal details, particularly details like our identification numbers with somebody who is not known to us, particularly through internet or through WhatsApp call or through LinkedIn or any platform like these. So we should be very particular not to share this very personal information with these strangers on these various social media platforms.
Absolutely, Marcus. I just wanted to actually add to that, and this is something that I've noticed, and I don't really see a lot of Pakistani TV, but my mom is glued to the news. So inadvertently, whenever I'm passing by or I'm sitting, I get to see, some bits of the news and the adverts that come in between, and sometimes these drama channels as well. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have that many advertising campaigns that actually cover fraud, scams, and internet frauds, for example, cyber crimes, or these financial activities. I mean, would you like to say anything regarding that?
Yeah, I agree to you, and I also agree to your previous statement that we only have heard this term human trafficking. So not everybody exactly understands the meaning of it. So in fact, we are living in Pakistan where people are getting exploited by the exploiters. So instead of using this fancy term of human trafficking, we should rather be using those various ways people are exploited. We should rather be, if we are putting up messages on the social media platforms, or if you're just trying to share this information with people who are not very educated, then instead of using this term human trafficking, we should rather be using the various ways people might be contacting people. So that way, there is going to be an alert, at least an alert in the mind of a person that, oh, yes, I've heard this term somewhere that if anybody will try to contact you using these, ways, so we need to be careful. So yeah, I agree to you. There aren't much campaigns, and so yeah, so there. I mean, although there have been NGOs, but at the level the information campaigns should be run. At those levels, these campaigns are not there. I agree to you.
Exactly. I recently, over this weekend, actually, I did an online course from EDX. And if anybody is actually interested in, checking it out, please do. It's a course offered by Jesus College, Cambridge, and it was to do with responding to sexual harassment and violence. And I finished that course in about, in a day or so. It was an absolutely brilliant course because of the way it was structured. But one thing it actually highlighted were the different videos that were circulated in different countries, whether it was India, whether it was America, whether it was Britain, whether it was New Zealand or China or any other country, and how that created awareness regarding sexual harassment. For example, bus पे sexual harassment हो रही है, so what, how is it taking place? Was it at different stages? How can you intervene as a bystander? And obviously, when we have the next session on on sexual harassment next week, I will definitely share some of those videos with you beforehand. But the point is that there are so many informative, educative videos that are circulating worldwide, but I don't see any in Pakistan, unfortunately. There might be some, I think, that the FIA might have created, but there isn't something that's prevalent on TV, unfortunately. Okay, anyway, I'm sorry for rambling, but I just try and share my thought process and my learning as well with you all as we go on. So actually, this over here actually depicts the scenario of human trafficking in a post-COVID world, or in fact, what was happening during the lockdown days. But just suffice it to show you that when the lockdown period was in place, the trafficking cases actually increased because of the closed borders. There were so many job losses. There was a lot of time spent online, so there was an increase in cyber crimes, and obviously, we discussed this previously. Domestic violence cases arose as well. So there was an increase in human trafficking. I'm going to try and avoid these slides, but I'm going to share this report with you. This is the Global Report on Trafficking in Persons 2022, and you can have a look if you want to. But these are just some of the different findings. So when I share this PowerPoint with you, you can just read through the slides. And it just shows you the different factors that have played a role in human trafficking, and what are the emerging trends. So for example, boys and men account for a greater share of victims as new forms of exploitation emerge. Women and children suffer greater at the hands of traffickers. More highly organized traffickers exploit more victims more violently and for longer periods of time, etc. So I'll share the report with you and you can have a look at it. Okay, and now we reach the second segment of this webinar, which is looking specifically at that migrant boat tragedy and this area of human smuggling. So before we were focusing a lot more on sexual exploitation, but now we're going to focus on labor exploitation. So I'd like you all, and I'm sure that you've all heard of this tragedy on the news. So I want you all to unmute yourselves one by one, and please tell me, what exactly do you know about this migrant boat tragedy? One by one, please.
Well, people out there were trying to make better future, so they thought by crossing Pakistan borders, there is going to be altogether a world where people finding job is going to be easy, where making money is going to be easy. So, there were a lot of people who were, belonging to, uh, I mean, belong to families which were not very well to do. So they only assume that if they will cross and enter into some country, then making money is going to be something which is going to be very easy. So out of that lust, I'll say, they risks their life, their life were, they threw themselves into a risk, and they were finally trapped. So that actually happened. So that a very quick summary of that incident.
Also,
Uh,
adding to that, Sana, I also understand that they were not given the priority for safety of their lives, which added to the tragedy. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add the same thing. That the one, the thing is that first, they're not just trying to migrate into the country, but they're also trying to because a lot of them are refugees as well. So probably they don't have anywhere back home as well. So the idea is to cross into Europe and then maybe find anywhere they can find asylum, or they can become refugees in any part of any European country. Mostly they try to go to Greece and these countries which have a corrupt government system. So they expect that by paying off, they might get entry into the country. How in this case, even though there was a life threat to their life, they weren't allowed access, and so they were just everybody watched them eventually drown and die. And no, I would say the most surprising part is no international organization or body is there to provide for the rights of these people. I mean, there is no watchdog that would be placed upon countries to check them if they are actually denying them basic human rights, even if they don't give them access to asylum or refuge in their country. At least they should have been given the opportunity to save themselves and maybe repatriated back to their countries of origin or wherever. But nothing was done in this case.
Thank you for that, Sadia. Thanks, Majid. Thanks, Margaret. That was all extremely helpful. One thing to be aware of is that, and obviously we're going to go into the depths of why these people ran and what exactly happened. There have been so many cases of asylum seekers trying to claim asylum in European countries, especially in countries like the UK, that those countries are now passing laws which ban these people who are illegally coming to their countries to claim asylum. The UK has recently passed an anti-immigration bill, and they're very happy about it. The people are very happy about it because they say that these people were coming and taking our jobs. They were coming and taking our accommodation. As you rightly said, Sadia, there are problems with the accommodation as well and how they're being treated. I mean, with this boat tragedy, we've seen those people who are in Greece and the way that they are being treated presently. They have so many complaints in terms of the basic amenities and not being able to, move back to their country. So these are all the grudges that people on the other end have. And we might find that very inhumane because of there is a refugee convention as well. And in light of that, and in light of all of these human rights conventions and talks, we might feel that people have a right to an asylum, which everybody's circumstances are different. And some people have very genuine circumstances, which is why they do illegally try and move out of their own country. But if you actually see it from the point of view of the other country and the opportunities that are being taken away by asylum seekers, then it gives you a twofold approach. So anyway, that's that. Just for those, again, this is just the purpose of this is actually for us to convey the message to others. Normally when we're sitting in a group, people say, यार पाकिस्तान से दिल घबरा गया है, दिल चाह रहा है यहाँ से किसी तरीके से भाग जाएं, legally भाग जाएं या illegally भी भाग जाएं. And it's our duty at that point to actually remind them that no, if you do illegally try and escape, these are the obstacles that you will face. You won't come across the right kind of people. You will be trapped in a human trafficking gang. Your passports will be taken away, your money will be taken away, you might lose your life. And even if you arrive at the shores of Great Britain, for example, you will be denied entry. So it's our duty to actually enlighten people, with all of this information. And again, I would say that when we look at this boat tragedy, most people didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, apart from the fact that they wouldn't get the asylum or whatever, they didn't know that they would just lose their lives. So, okay. These are just some of the routes used by Pakistan's human traffickers. And as you can see, as I've mentioned before, you have different modes of transportation. It could be on land, by air, and by sea. So as you can see, if you start from Karachi, they go to Dubai by plane, and then Saudi Arabia, etc. And then from Cairo, I think it's by ship, and then they move on to Libya, and then from there again by ship to to Italy through Greece. And then if you look at the other route, if they go through Iran, I'm assuming that those symbols are for buses or lorries. I mean, I'm sure that you've heard of many cases where these lorries are raided, especially lorries entering the United Kingdom. And when they open them, they'll find so many people and children, in fact, sitting in them, and they're all illegal immigrants who've been promised God knows what, and this is the condition they arrive in these hi-fi countries. So anyway, this is just to illustrate the routes. Okay, I actually wrote an article on this migrant boat tragedy, and I will share the link of that article with you if you guys want to read it. And it's in fact a lot of what we've been talking about today. Apart from this boat tragedy, and I've actually spoken about what is human trafficking, why aren't people aware of it, why aren't people aware of what's happening, and why are they falling prey to these sort of organization and these people. So again, on my part and on your parts as well, I would say that please do as much as you can to raise awareness regarding these issues. So the name of that boat, by the way, was the Adriana, and the title of my article was The Doomed Adriana. It wasn't even a boat, it was a trawler, so it was something that was falling apart in any case, and it did fall apart eventually. So the first question then is, why do people resort to running away illegally? Now, I don't really need to ask you that question, because given the halat of Pakistan, given the circumstances, economic and otherwise, um, it's imaginable why anybody would want to run away. I mean, in this past year, many people, especially belonging to the younger generation, have legally migrated from Pakistan for work or on other sorts of visas. So when it comes to uh, the poor who have no access to uh, you know jobs in other countries, what exactly do they do? I actually shared another video with you on the WhatsApp group chat, and in that, that's actually the tale of somebody who died in Greece, somebody who was on that boat. And his mother then says, she talks to the media and she tells them that पैम्पर खरीदने के भी पैसे नहीं थे. तो वो ये कहता था कि अम्मी मेरे पास पैम्पर खरीदने के भी पैसे नहीं है, तो बच्चों का मैं ख्याल कैसे रखूं? It's better for me to go out and find work so that at least I can look after you and look after my children and my family. So it's a very pitiable situation. But anyway, so Pakistan is in a state of hyperinflation, and last year's floods caused $30 billion in losses, killed thousands of people. People are in search of better prospects. And then when we talk about this particular boat tragedy, there were about 700 or so people in total. Mainly were from rural Punjab, very poor people who don't even know how to communicate properly. And only 104 men, Egyptians, Pakistanis, Syrians, and Palestinians have survived. But again, this number has changed. It's changing every day because there are probably more survivors, or some of those are even dying. So again, this is something to watch out for. I would also like to say that the FIA have made a series of arrests, but again, not all of the human traffickers have been arrested. But anyway, when we talk about the FIA, we'll see what more are they doing. Again, I've spoken briefly about this, that it wasn't a boat, it was a trawler. The conditions on the vessel were horrific. The survivors have said that passengers were denied food, and those who couldn't drive, the crew, were beaten. They couldn't even reach the deck level. And you've seen the image of that boat. You've seen how overcrowded, overcramped it was. What do you expect? And again, this is a lesson for many others that if you opt for such measures, this is how you actually end up, as unfortunate as it is, because these human traffickers are people who are completely inhumane. They're insensitive. They're not what I would call human beings. They're monsters. If somebody can do that to another human being, you're certainly not human. You're definitely a demon. And then another thing that Sadia was talking about was the situation at the other end. I mean, there's this image, if you can again see my cursor, and you can see all of these beds and these people. So this is a sort of refugee camp in Greece, and all of these people are the survivors of that boat tragedy. And again, they haven't found themselves in a hospitable or a livable environment, and it makes them wonder what exactly were they running from. This image in the middle are some of the relatives of those who died or who may have been lost, and it just shows you how poor they are. They're not even able to approach the police or to say anything because most of them don't even know what's happening. And this is just an image of one of the boys, I think, who died or who's missing. And there are just so many more. I mean, there's so many horror stories that you've probably heard of on the news, or you can go and see on YouTube. Okay, so what is the FIA doing to combat human trafficking? I mean, there's a lot that they're doing, and I've taken all of this from the FIA website. They have made their staff more aware of human trafficking, which is something that was not in existence before. I have to say that. And obviously we've heard of things like the exit control list, and especially to do with our wonderful politicians. But obviously this is something that's used to control human traffickers and smugglers as well. And there are these other systems as well, all given on this page that you can have a look at. Even the NADRA card itself and the entire NADRA procedure has actually become really helpful in terms of highlighting the backgrounds of people, and it has made a lot of progress in terms of detecting and bringing these people to justice. There are now different sorts of bodies as well that actually try and target these fake or forged travel documents as well, which can also be detected at the immigration checkpost. So suffice it to say that a lot is being done. I would also like to say, and I know this for a fact, that the FIA do have different cells. So they have got they've got anti-human trafficking cells in which they do detain and question and investigate suspected human traffickers. That is something that they do. Anti-money laundering cells also exist, and of course, Majid, you could probably talk a little bit about that. The cyber crime wing exists, and the reason why, and I've got this image over here from the FIA website, because it shows you that all of these crimes are actually interrelated, and this is actually how human trafficking operates. So anti-human smuggling and immigration, that is one aspect of that. Forged documentation, as we've seen. Money laundering is of course a part of that, and a lot of it happens through these cybercrime activities. Interpol plays an important role in terms of coordinating and liaising with the FIA and to bringing people justice. And they've also got these different links and establishment of coordination between Pakistan and law enforcement agencies in Oman, Spain, the United Kingdom, Turkey, Malaysia, and Iran, and other countries as well. Okay, let me just check the time. Okay, so these are just very quick slides, and again, I will share these statutes with you. They're not very long, but again, this is just for your knowledge, for you to know that we do have, apart from the Pakistani Penal Code, we actually have specific laws on human trafficking and migrant smuggling. So the Prevention of Human Trafficking Act was passed in 2018, and I've just highlighted some of the main provisions of that act over here. So the penalty for trafficking in persons is 7 years imprisonment or a fine of 1 million rupees or both for the human trafficker. There is a list of aggravating circumstances as well. And when we say aggravating circumstances, it's what makes a crime worse in its form. So sort of psychological abuse of the victim, etc. So it's worthwhile to have a look at that. It's also worthwhile to highlight that victims of trafficking are not criminally liable under the statute, neither under this statute nor under the anti-smuggling statute. In fact, they're given different sorts of protections. They're provided with accommodation, they're provided with compensation as well. And if they are called in court, the proceedings are in camera. That means that their identity is concealed from the world. These offenses are cognizable and non-bailable offenses. So you can definitely see the gravity of these crimes. Prevention of Smuggling and Migrants Act 2018. So again, the punishment of migrant smugglers is somewhere between 3 to 5 years. Documents or forged documents, illegal documents, again, culminates in an offense, and the imprisonment for that is 1 to 3 years. Again, I have to highlight the fact that as far as smuggled migrants are concerned, there is a provision that highlights the non-criminalization of these migrants, and they will not become liable to criminal prosecution under this act. So the main purpose is to make these people come forward, to make the victims come forward, so that they can share their stories and for other people to not fall a victim to these gangs. Okay. And last but not the least, what can you do, what can organizations do in terms of fighting human trafficking? So firstly, spot the signs, which is what we've been discussing. Look at the different red flags. Try to understand the intricacies of sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, and all the other forms of human trafficking that we discussed. If you were to ever stumble upon something, please don't hesitate to report an incident. The FIA, of course, is the leading body in Pakistan that deals with human trafficking, so they would be the first organization to contact. There are other international organizations which you can check online. I have been doing some volunteering work with this organization in the UK called Stop the Traffic. They're based in London. And I dealt with a lot of translating work actually for those victims of human trafficking or forced labor from Pakistan who found themselves in Greece and Turkey. And these Stop the Traffic actually have an app called the Stop app, where you can report an incident, and of course then that is then passed on to the Metropolitan Police and probably to Interpol, so on and so forth, and to the relevant bodies within your own jurisdictions. For organizations, of course, it's important to have these intelligence reports. It's important to have policies. One thing that's actually drastically lacking in Pakistani organizations are modern slavery statements. I don't know, some organizations might be having them, and Majid, I think you can probably enlighten us on that. But as far as I'm aware of, there are not that many modern slavery statements to actually show how the supply chains of those organizations are working. I mean, banks have them, international banks have them. So this is something that needs to be looked at in terms of organizations. And then awareness campaigns such as these webinars or others, physical get-togethers just to talk about these issues is something that's very important. Community coordination. If something is happening within your community and you're aware of it, if something's happening within your neighborhood, then, please try and do something about it. Try and at least form some sort of an association within your neighborhood or community or your friend circle as well to highlight these issues and to do something. So with that, I am just going to stop presentation, and I'm just going to stop the recording as well.